Okay, so today we're finishing up our short series as we're going through famous Old Testament stories, and we're making sure to see Jesus at the center of the entire Old Testament. We want to read the Old Testament with New Testament eyes. And, even Jesus in Luke 24, he said that the Old Testament, that the law and the prophets testify about him. So we really want to learn what does that mean? How do we see Jesus on every page? And so today we're looking at maybe the most famous story of the entire series, David and Goliath. Okay, and so most sermons on David and Goliath go like this: be brave like David. Here's how you can face your giants. If you'll have courage, everything will go right in your life. Okay, but that's not exactly what this story is trying to teach us today. Because if that's the primary point of this story, then the Bible is nothing more than a self-help manual with a slingshot, And so the problem is, if we read the Bible mainly as a series of moral encouragements and moral examples, we'll miss Jesus. One of the main takeaways from the Bible is that you'll never be good on your own power. That your sin is so bad, my sin is so bad, that the Son of God had to die in our place. And so you becoming good in your own power is not really on the table. All right, so the question today is not how can I be like David, but how does David point me to the true and better king? Because again, if the story points us to go defeat your giants in life, then you'll either become proud if you do or crushed if you fail, right? So we'll be in 1 Samuel chapter 17 today, if you want to go and turn there or scroll there. David is the most interesting man in the Bible. Okay, David did it all. He was a king, all-powerful king at one point. He was a shepherd for much of his life. He killed a bear. He killed a lion. Spoiler alert, he killed a giant at one point, okay? And, David sinned as bad as a man can sin, okay? And God said, "No, David, there's a man after my own heart." So David did it all. And so, God bless you. So, most people in America are familiar with our story today, but they kind of get it wrong, and they see David as like this. So how many filled out a March Madness bracket a couple of months ago? Okay, cool. Great crowd participation there. So when we fill those out, we'll pick out these David and Goliath matchups, right? How a 14 seed to beat a 3 seed, Rocky beating Clubber Lang. That's what we think who David is, like he was this real underdog, but that's not really how David sees himself in the story. So let's just walk through, just keep your Bibles open today, 1 Samuel 17. We're just going to walk through the story. Verse 1, now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle. The nation of Israel readies itself to go against the mighty, ruthless Philistines, verses 2 and 3. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, and Israel on the mountain on the other side, with a valley in between them. So picture this in your mind, okay? The Philistines are over here on this mountain. The people of Israel are on this mountain, valley in between. None of them have long-range missiles. So really, until they approach each other and do some hand-to-hand combat, they're kind of at a standoff. Verse 4. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines, drum roll, a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Goliath was 9'9". He was huge, okay? This was a bad dude, a champion, it says. I imagine like prime Shaquille O'Neal emerging from the tunnel and the crowd goes wild, okay? Picture it. Again, armies on either side of the mountain, of the valley, and everybody's kind of ready for battle. Everybody's ready to go. But then this giant appears, this champion, and the Philistines go nuts. They erupt and they cheer, and the people of Israel go quiet. Verses 5 to 7. There it is. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. Y'all believe that? And his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. So what it's painting here, so all in all, this is about 200 pounds of armor this guy is wearing. And so this isn't like he's not like skin and bone, like Victor Wembanyama. He's like skin and bone, super tall, but no, he is like huge. He's massive. He's intimidating. Look at verse 8. He stood and he shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Man, why have y'all come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not servants of Saul, the king? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." Verse 10. And the Philistines said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. This is ancient Near Eastern trash talk. Okay, that's what's going on there. He's like, let's go then. We got our armor on. Y'all are here. I'm here. Let's rumble. Let's get after it. So instead of what they're proposing, essentially, is instead of thousands of men dying in battle, me and one of y'all fight and winner take all. Mano a mano, hand-to-hand combat. This is called a representative battle. And the representative from Israel should have been King Saul. That was customary, that the king steps up for his men. But look at what King Saul is doing in verse 11. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Not exactly what you want from your king in this moment. He is scared to death. He's frozen with fear. And then in verse 16, for 40 days, the Philistine came forward and took his stand, morning and night, saying the same thing over and over. Y'all ain't ready? Man, y'all little men, what are y'all doing out here? Y'all are nothing. These Philistines, y'all are not. Over and morning and night for 40 days, talking trash, demeaning. It's terrible. They have to live through it. Meanwhile, young David would go back and forth to camp running errands. So David was a teenage shepherd boy at this point. So he's not in training. He's not part of the soldiers at all. He is just a teenage guy, shepherd out in the fields, not part of this at all. He's just kind of bringing his older brothers who are soldiers, PB&Js and goldfish every day, just kind of running errands. David is being faithful in the small things. He's not plotting his ascension to the throne. David, God had these huge plans for David's life, but David is being given very little at this point, but he's being faithful in the small things. He's doing the small things with excellence. Same for you today. No matter how small or seemingly inconsequential the task is for you, stay faithful, trust God. Look at verse 22. And David left the things in charge, his sheep, of the keeper of the baggage, and ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before, and David heard him. This big dude talked trash one too many times, Morning and night, he had been talking that talk 40 days, letting everybody know who the man is, over and over again. And while all the men of Israel, the big soldiers, shrunk back in fear, the right man heard it this time, verse 24 and 25. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who's come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And the king, but they were like, if you kill the guy, the king will enrich the man who kills him and the great riches, and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. It's like, wait a minute. So the soldiers, they're fearful. They've chosen to not engage in battle. But then they start talking about how awesome it would be if you actually did kill the guy, what you would get. It's kind of a funny note for the Bible to include here. So they're like, you would get rich, you get to marry a total 10, you don't ever have to, you're tax exempt the rest of your life. And then David, we see here that he's interested in taking on the giant, but for none of the reasons that the other guys are interested in it. David doesn't care about the tax exemption, It's the fact that Goliath is mocking God. That's what he's like, this guy is disrespecting Yahweh, Now, remember, David hasn't been on the battlefield the last month. He's not been through training, He's been in the fields with the sheep. And as a shepherd, there's a lot of downtime, Hours and hours of hanging out. And so, what has David been doing with his downtime, When he had afternoons free in isolation, was he scrolling TikTok, doing a crossword puzzle? No, he's been writing psalms and praying to God. Every day, all day. And here's the blaring of truth that you can apply today. What David did in private is about to be witnessed in public. Being comes before doing. You ever been to a summer camp or a spring break retreat or something, which, by the way, our student camp is full, The bus is full, yeah. Over half of our students that are going in a couple of weeks are high school boys. So as you pray for the leaders, but that's awesome. But if you've ever been to a student camp or a spiritual retreat, you know how when you leave that time, you're on this spiritual high. You don't watch TV for the week and you're going to worship all the time. You're in the Word, you're praying, you're with your Christian friends, and you're on the spiritual high. That's David here, He's been in isolation with just him and God praying, and he's on this spiritual high. And look at his reaction in that context in verse 26. And David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done? for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel. For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? You see, David's perspective versus the perspective of the rest of the guys in Israel, he's not worried about gain or glory. He is consumed with the fact that this guy is mocking Almighty God. He's floored that this man, he doesn't even really, it's like he's not even considering that the guy's 9'9", carrying 200 pounds of, he can't believe that this man is defying the living God, and he can't believe that nobody's doing anything about it. So David's brother, specifically the older brother, takes offense, mocks him, questions David's motives here. Look at verse 28. Now, Eliab, the oldest brother, heard when David spoke to the man, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And the older brother said, man, what are you doing here? With whom have you left those few sheep, older brother talked, in the wilderness? I know your presumption. Man, I know the evil in your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. It's interesting to me how often this happens. When you want to do something great for the Lord, rather than being met with approval and encouragement, you're met with cynicism and other people's doubts. So often when God's people should go, great idea. Man, start the business, start the church, go to seminary, I'm with you. Instead, they project their own fears and failures onto you. If God has laid a vision or a dream in your heart, go for it. Move forward in faith, act on your convictions. You don't always have to believe the limitations that others put on you. Okay, now, maybe the older brother felt convicted. Maybe he felt embarrassed by his little brother's fearlessness. He knew that he should have been saying what his little brother is saying here for the past 40 days, that he should have stepped up to the plate, but instead of encouraging his little brother for doing the right thing, he tries to tear David down. Hey, church, don't be the older brother. Okay, when a little brother comes to you, let's encourage them. Let's get behind them instead of meeting them with cynicism. Let's call out their courage, okay, in a good way. So maybe, though, some of you are in David's position. You've been thinking about moving forward in faith towards something God's been moving in your heart to move as a missionary or start something or do something that hasn't happened in your family in the best way, and somebody told you can't do it, okay? You need to do exactly as David did in verse 29 here. David said, what have I done now? I just spoke a word. And he turned away, from his brother toward another and said the same dadgum thing. And the people answered him again as before. David rose above the criticism, okay? David stayed on mission even when his brother discouraged him. That's hard to do. Most people stop there, right? Verse 30 literally says he turned away from the brother and turned to another. He had to go the other way, all right? So now, of course, the Bible talks a lot about listening to the advice of others. Okay, so just a small asterisk here. Proverbs 12:15 even says, a wise man listens to advice. Okay, so your default mode should not be to ignore godly advice. That's not what I'm saying. But sometimes people project their fear onto us and we need to turn to another. So the word got to King Saul, king of Israel, that David was ready to take on Goliath. Like in verse 33. And King Saul said to teenage David, man, you're not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him. Now, he's right. Okay? But, oh, king, you've forgotten what's happening here. This is God's man. We are God's people. This is God's battle. Okay? For you are but a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, actually, my guy, your servant, your boy used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. That's awesome. Your servant, your boy has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. Verse 37. David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion, notice, David doesn't say, I am tough. I killed the lion. No, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, well, go ahead then with your bad self and the Lord be with you, okay? Go ahead with your bad self is something we said in the 90s, and I think it could come back, that'd be fine. So David can't stand the fact that this guy is mocking God, the living God, God's people, and it's interesting, David puts Goliath in the same category as lions and bears. He's not measuring giants against bears. He's measuring giants against God, right? And so David knew this was God's battle, not his. Goliath, defied God, and now Goliath would face those consequences. So King Saul's like, okay, I see it. Go for it. That's great. So King Saul gives David all of his armor. David puts that on. And it doesn't really fit. So he takes all that off, and he just takes the sling in his hand. Verse 40, look. There it is. Then David took his staff in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached Goliath. Look at as Goliath responds in verses 41 to 44 as David kind of approaches the battlefield. And the Philistine moved forward, came near to David. He's kind of licking his chops here. He's like, oh man, they're going to send this guy? No armor? Teenage shepherd? Okay. He's like, okay, with this. So Goliath moved forward with his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his little gods. The Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Now, okay, listen, we're on David's side here, but you got to admit, Goliath is not bad at talking trash. Okay, if you're honest, that's pretty good, okay, there. And we know what's about to happen, okay? So we can kind of lose sight as to just exactly what a mismatch this really is, okay? And so just imagine today, the whole time, just every few minutes, LeBron James has been on the back row, where most of you are sitting, until next Sunday, okay? But, so LeBron James has been in the back, and just every few minutes he goes, I'm the best basketball player in this room. I'm the man, y'all are terrible. And I don't do anything. I just kind of keep preaching, acting like nothing happens. Security stays still. Okay, nobody moves. But it's rude. Every few minutes he goes, I'm the man. None of y'all can take me on the court. But, and objectively, that's true. He's 6'8", most basketball points. He's the second best player in basketball history. Come on, somebody. Most points scored ever. Against any of us, LeBron is the man on the court. Okay, but again, every few minutes, he's like, I'm the man. After a while, about halfway through the sermon, I go, enough. Move these chairs, line it up, game to 11, loser dies. I got him. Y'all would do that, okay? You wouldn't go, yeah, Matt, you got this. You would go, actually, my brother, I don't think that's the way to go. So it's not a very winnable fight for David. You heard King Saul, David, I don't think this is what you want to do, my guy. And so you can just picture Goliath as this teenage shepherd with no armor on approaches. He thinks the battle is over. So Goliath is making some assumptions about what's about to happen as David approaches. And what happens when we assume? That's right, we often get it wrong. Look at verse 45. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Okay. David's really hung up on the fact that Goliath has defied the Almighty God, and he's ready to fight about it. So David is consumed with honoring God. He's consumed with it, and that meant more to him than his own life. David is not intimidated. It's almost like, as you read the text, it's almost like David doesn't understand he's the underdog. Like you're the 14th seed. You're Rocky, my guy. And so it's almost like David can't imagine any other outcome than God being great. I was saying, it's almost like David can't imagine any other outcome than God being great. Only confidence in God, bold, courageous faith in God. You remember he said, God delivered me from the paw of the lion. Look at verses 46 and 47. This is still David speaking. This day, the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. We leave that part out of the children's Bibles here. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, and that all the earth will know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with a sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. That'd be a good one to memorize. Look at verses 48 to 51. When the Philistine arose and came and draw near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine, and David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face on the ground with a big thunderous boom. So, verse 50, so David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone. and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. So David ran and stood over the Philistine, took the guy's own sword, and drew it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. The grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of our God will stand forever. Just think about what we've seen. Okay, I know it's a familiar story. 3,000 years ago, a Philistine giant named Goliath, a champion, an unbeatable warrior, was defeated by a teenage shepherd. Okay, the popular, again, moral of the story is, now, get out there and face your giants because the heroically courageous always come out on top. That's the takeaway. All right, go have lunch. Okay, but no, this story is not trying to teach us, stand tall against the giants in your life and you'll see them fall. Okay, the moral of the story, the point of the story rather, is that Jesus fought as our representative while we stood on the sidelines doing nothing to help him. Even mocking him and even doubting that he could come through, is that Jesus fought our real giant, sin, right? Just like David. Jesus was opposed by all of his brothers and was abandoned at the moment of battle, okay? Jesus walked into the battlefield all alone, and he conquered the giant all by himself. Jesus didn't throw a stone rolled over his tomb, and now we, his brothers, get to share in his victory. We didn't lift a finger, and yet we get to share in his victory. The real giant in our lives, our real Goliath, was our separation from God, the penalty that we owed because of our sin. The Bible says the real giants are sin, death, judgment, separation from God, and every human strategy collapses under them. Now, you can medicate guilt, you can distract yourself from mortality, you can achieve success, you can build an image, but underneath it all is the same trembling fear of the people of Israel here. Human beings cannot save ourselves. But now, because Jesus has taken out the greatest giant in our lives, you and I can bravely face the lesser giants in Christ. So it's true, right, that David was courageous, right? And courage is an essential, great virtue. Courage is good. But when he faced Goliath, David's courage was a spin-off virtue, okay? There was something that was empowering that courage. So where does David's courage come from? Right? How could David jump to the front lines and expect to win when the rest of the soldiers thought that fighting Goliath was a suicide mission? The difference is faith in God, not faith in self. That's what the world is going to teach you all week this week. Believe in yourself. You got this. You can do it. That's not the message of the Bible, okay? The message of the Bible is trust God. Have confidence and faith in God. For whatever reason, to Saul and the other soldiers, Goliath looked bigger than God, okay? So what made David different? Okay, it's not that he had this great self-confidence and, this raw courage like Tony Stark, he believed in himself, or that he knew his physical abilities. He was like a Green Beret or a Navy SEAL. He knew he could get the job done. What fueled David's courage was his confidence in God's promises and God's power to fulfill them. David was not self-confident, he was God-confident. That's the difference. It wasn't that David was this fearless guy. Go read the first 25 Psalms. Okay, David battled fear and unbelief and self-doubt and all these things all the time. One of the most misunderstood parts of this story is that it was, we pictured David like this super self-confident guy. He had this high self-esteem. No, David had a high God esteem. That was the difference. Listen again to what angers David. This uncircumcised Philistine has defied the armies of the living God. David is jealous for God's glory. Okay, biblical courage is not believing in yourself. Biblical courage is believing God is faithful. Dr. Jim Jennison has this great quote. He says, "When I trust God more than I can understand him, I put myself in a position to experience him." You and I will be able to face the smaller giants to the extent that we believe that God has already conquered the greatest giant of our sin. Ben, if you'll come forward. This story points directly to Jesus, who died in our place. Again, David fights as Israel's representative, right? And again, this is how ancient combat often worked. One champion stood in place of the people. If the representative won, they all won. If the representative lost, they all lost. This means the fate of the entire nation rests on one man. And you see the gospel pattern here, right? Because it's exactly how the Bible describes what Jesus has won for us. So Adam, the first man, was our representative, and he failed. So humanity fell with him. But Jesus comes as the true and better representative, the true champion, the conquering king. Where Adam failed in the garden, Jesus obeyed in the garden. You see, where Israel trembled before their enemy, Jesus stood firm before ours. Where David fought for his people, Christ dies for his people. Your salvation depends on a champion acting in your place. Jesus is the true and better champion, the true and better shepherd, the true and better warrior, the true and better deliverer. The true and better David did not merely risk his life, he gave his life for us. He walked into the battlefield, and at the cross, it looked like Goliath was winning. Sin seemed victorious. Death seemed undefeated. Hell appeared triumphant, but 3 days later, the stone was rolled away. And the greater David emerged victorious forever on our behalf. So the question is not, are you brave enough? No. The question is, have you trusted the champion? Because once you belong to Jesus, his victory becomes your victory. And suddenly you can stand in places you never thought possible, not because you're so strong and fearless, but because Christ has already conquered the giant that truly matters. Jesus is the true and better David, an unlikely champion from Bethlehem who went into the battle alone in our place as our representative, who was mocked by his brothers, who secured deliverance for his kingdom, who defeated the ultimate giant of sin, death, and hell on our behalf.